Today, on a very special episode of Prove It, we're speaking with someone who's accepted papers that you've cited and potentially killed papers that founders were sort of hoping to build their companies off. They've asked to remain anonymous, and we're calling them the Secret Editor. Welcome to Prove It, the show where digital health leaders stop hand-waving, start evidence building, and reveal how extraordinary claims become extraordinary results. I'm your host, Paul Wicks, and each episode I'm joined by someone who's had their ideas tested in the fire of peer review, regulators, and the market. Today, we have a very special guest who's asked to remain anonymous so that we can hear the raw, unvarnished truth about the current state of medical publishing. Today, our secret editor is a medical doctor who has worked all over the world and has held key editorial roles in some of the world's top journals. Some of what you'll hear today will explain why good science can sometimes die quietly and mediocre science might even sail through. So, Secret Editor, welcome to Prove It. Can you tell us a little bit about what first attracted you to publishing from clinical work in medicine?
Oh, I was never attracted to publishing. I think that over the course of this discussion, you may find my thesis about publishing as an industry to be not particularly compatible with someone who works in it or is attracted to it.
At the start of your career, who did you think editors served? Authors, readers, patients, or some greater scientific truth?
I've learned more and more about what editors do and what an editor is as my career has gone on. When I was a medical student, I spent some time at a medical journal and understood a lot more than I'd been taught at medical school about what publishing a paper means. But throughout my career, I've found out more and more about why the system and the process is the way it is, and a lot of it is bonkers. So I hope to shed a bit of light on sort of the system and the processes that scientific publishing engages with. And I think the main thing that I want people to understand is that there is a deeply entrenched symbiotic relationship between research and the publishing industry, and there's a publishers are bad general consensus among scientists, which is 100% true. But there is a scientists and the universities and the institutions they work for continue to actively choose to give publishers a huge amount of power and money. And I think there's a lot of interest in changing that, but there's relatively few hugely practical ideas or revenue sources or all those sorts of things that could change that are around. But yeah, I'm probably going too big too soon here, Paul.
No. That's great. No, so I think we'll definitely dive into, I think, two things. One is money and incentives, right? And I think helping people to understand how that flows, but also that the system is bonkers. So medical publishing has been around for hundreds of years, right? And I guess started off with a very different set of traditions. Like I was at the Freud Museum earlier this year, and he's got all these letters, and basically a lot of medical publishing started off as a bunch of nerds, often Victorian gentlemen poshing around in their basements, making dynamites or cutting up corpses, sending letters to their mates. Ooh, I found a new thing.
The letter is still today remains a considered format in certain journals for a certain way of expressing a certain type of idea that's a certain length and has certain ideas in it. And so that idea that the reason why publishing started is because the printing press started and you could send a letter to 400 mates rather than one mate at a time. So there's a whole proper history of the publishing industry, and how science fits in with that is really interesting. The historical fact that I enjoy sharing the most is the reason we have the STM publishing industry that we do today is thanks to a certain chap called Robert Maxwell, who you may know from falling off a yacht.
Yeah, couldn't have happened to a nicer guy, as I recall.
He bought a whole bunch of journals that were originally owned by universities. So the university publishing presses were not for profit, only for the benefit of their institutions, really. And he thought, well, no one's commercializing this huge amount of content. Does anyone sound familiar? And so he bought the content for pittance and then established an industry where people had to pay to read it. And that happened, well, in his lifetime, obviously, but his lifetime wasn't that long ago. And so it's all fairly recent that the big public and that body of work that was obviously added to continuously and has grown, and then industries have grown in and out of it, that became the big publishing houses, like core workload and core journals. It was called Pergamon Press initially. That was what he was involved with.
Oh yes, I remember. Yeah, I don't see that name anymore. I presume because there's been so many mergers, right? So things have merged up into Elsevier and Springer Nature and all these other sort of mega houses.
It is not for me in my position as secret editor to name any names of any particular publishers, because who knows who I work for. But yes, some of those.
Yeah. So we'll come back to that, because I think it's important to say that this started off as letters to similarly minded colleagues, and then sort of societies, proceedings of the annual meeting of people interested in brain anatomy or what have you. But then starting to move more towards conferences. Conference proceedings were often one of the first forms of publishing, right? But this notion that sort of I show you what I've done, and then other people could reply and say, "Oh, have you thought about this?" or what have you. Does that then naturally lead us into peer review? So, do you know at what point sort of peer review starts coming in? Because now that's the thing that it's known for, right? Peer-reviewed work is the key differentiator between just being on your blog.
Absolutely. So I think just before we get deep into peer review, where there's so much to say, to recognize and understand that the value of conferences is different in different parts of science and all of academia. And so the presenting at conferences and getting published in proceedings and journals, still a lot of journals are still called proceedings of, even though they've got nothing to do with an individual conference. That's how a lot of journals started to exist. And the whole point of a conference is you get together with other people and get your ideas interrogated. So that sort of conferences and proceedings of conferences is still the main feature of a lot of specialties. Medicine, I think most areas of medicine still have conferences where there is that value, but there's more of an education element to conferences, or most parts of most conferences, and then that new discovery and did it work, why didn't it work discussion has tended to move into the journals and happens in what we now know as the peer review process. By the way, a lot of things, peer review process happens before conferences as well as to select what goes into conferences, as well as that discussion that happens at conferences. But yeah, peer review is the whole point of it is based on valuing expertise, and the whole role of me as an editor. And I think something really interesting about the role of the editor, understanding that there are some editors who are not subject matter experts, and there are some editors who are specifically there because they are subject matter experts.
Yeah, well, let's break that down a little bit, because particularly if you're a digital health founder, say, and you've come from management or investing or product design or something, can you tell us a little bit about the sort of the sausage factory? So someone writes a paper. Let's say they've got a paper, they've got some advice, and it's got an introduction and a discussion or whatever. Who are the people touching it? Because you basically follow the guidelines and then you put it into a giant ticketing system, and then you don't hear back. So tell me about the people on the other side. Who are they? What are their interests? What's their training? And why is it important that we know about them?
Yeah, so I'll stop you there. In that you basically follow the guidelines. People don't follow the guidelines. The number one rule of getting your paper published is read the fucking guidelines. All journals have them. If you want to get something published in the journal, say, we will publish things that are and do and say and include these things. We will not publish things that don't. Just follow the rules. Anyway, I'll say that several times over the course of this podcast. I'm absolutely sure. So the touch points that the manuscript goes to start with admin and tick boxes. And that is why getting things right according to the guidelines is really important. And so the first thing that will happen on any journal really is a desk decision from an editor-in-chief who will see a fairly raw paper and go, this is bullshit, this is all right, or this is really interesting. And those are the sort of decisions that editors-in-chief make initially. If it's bullshit, it'll be rejected. noting that a lot of the big publishing houses want to publish things because they get a fee each time they publish things from the people who are trying to publish things.
And this is either, a big pyramid of champagne flutes overflow with champagne, or it's a big bunch of toilets overflowing with sewage, depending on the quality of the work being submitted.
You might want that. I could possibly comment. But I will say something more like I like to think of it more as a web because the next I'm going to say that editor-in-chief has a huge amount of autonomy, or should have. Does have. Sometimes that editor-in-chief has a huge amount of autonomy, is probably a better way of saying it. But they might have a very particular idea of the scope of their journal in terms of subject matter, in terms of quality, in terms of relevance, in terms of novelty. They often just decide all that for themselves. Again, massively depends on the journal. But this is bullshit from one editor-in-chief in one specific specialty area. Is not necessarily the same as another's in exactly the same specialty for a different journal, because they're looking for different things. One might be going for impact factor, the other might be a passionate publisher of data and wants lots and lots to be published. The publishing model they're working in with will affect that, but one decision isn't always the other. But the important thing to say is there are some things that are just rubbish and everyone will throw away. And then this middle ground of, could be for us, is pretty big. And then the top bit of this is really interesting, is really small. You've got to get into the middle bit and how good a fit you are with that journal and that editor in that huge middle ground is the important bit of where you will or won't get published, because it's unlikely you don't know you're publishing something brilliant. You might think you're publishing something brilliant and you're not. But if you have the right experience, you know when something is really good, because you'll be submitting it to, I don't know, a top tier high impact journal.
Yeah, but there's no cost to submitting to that top tier journal, right? So this concept of the cascade, I think, works from the publishing perspective of, well, this isn't right for us, but guess what? We've got an open access web only version where you can still give us the $3,000 and we accept half of what we take it. Equally, it costs me nothing to send something to the New England Journal of Medicine, say. It costs me an email and my time. And even if it's a 0.0001% chance of it landing, publishing in a journal that my gran has heard of feels great. Whereas publishing in the, Andalusian Journal of Rural Dentistry, meh.
How dare you mention the journal I had it now? But there's something really interesting there as well, Paul, I think, about, especially for people who are not coming from an academic background, like some really basic golden rules that might not be spread out. You can only submit to one journal at a time. Most journals, if they're in any way worth their salt, will be publishing their response rates to decisions and to first decision as well. And that what we're talking about, we're still only just talking about the first decision. So depending on what your objectives are in terms of publishing, you need to be wise to those sorts of things. Like the top tier medical journals will have a acceptance rate of 0.5%. They might have a time to decision of 6 months. In which case, your calculus on is it worth sending it to them is no, because I really want this published within 6 months, please. And then you start going, all I need is publication. Let me just try and get it published anywhere. Where is the shortest time publication? And if that's your only criteria, God, I help you. I'm the editor working on that journal, but it becomes important to you. So there's loads of metrics around publishing that are really important to have, to either understand or have someone on your side who understands them.
And I suppose you at least want to look, right, if this information is publicly available and you can see this journal takes a year for a first decision and this journal, we may be desk rejected, but it'll only take 2 days. That's really important in coming up with a plan, right? And I think one of the key things we talk about a lot is have a publication plan. Don't just, willy-nilly wait to hear back. Otherwise, you're sort of taking no information. So, okay, so we've got the editor-in-chief who is his offer. And let's say, then there are some larger journals, some well-known journals where there might also be associate editors and production assistants. So just, and even an editorial board. Can you just quickly give us the details on some of those folks?
So there's a number of different roles that have got a number of different names that are employed in a number of different ways in a number of different journals, sometimes even within the same publisher. So there's an editorial board, which could be a group of key opinion leaders that are selected. Let's just say, for argument's sake, for their great standing, and they want people to look at the editorial board, go, oh, they're associated with it, this must be a great journal, who actually do fuck all, ever, even when asked. But the idea is that they might steer the scope of the journal and support the editor-in-chief in difficult decisions on particular manuscripts if there's a controversial manuscript or whatever else.
But it's kind of big cheese patronage, but they have no. It's not like they're directors. They don't have any liability. They don't go to publication jail if there's retractions. So it is quite honorary, quite variable.
Oh yeah, well yeah, but you sometimes hear of the editorial board has resigned, and you kind of think, well, back at the publishers, they're going, and the difference to our daily work here is. Anyway, that's a slightly cynical view of editorial boards. Some of them are great, and they get involved in all the subsequent roles I'm going to describe, which could be called anything. But the editor-in-chief, will then likely assign this paper to someone else who has a closer than them academic understanding of the topic area. And that person might be an associate editor, they might be a deputy editor, senior editor. Sometimes they might be paid and employed by the publishers, as might the editor-in-chief. Sometimes they might be doing it completely for free. Sometimes they might get an honorarium, which might range from 2 days a week through to 1 day a year of payment from the publisher for doing this work. Their deputy editors may receive a small honorarium for work throughout the year. And then you've got associate editors who are doing it as part of their academic work, who take a paper through peer review, which I think is what you were trying to talk about 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, but no, it's interesting so it's very important for people to know, because you might think that when you submit a journal, you're corresponding directly with the editor-in-chief. I've experienced this where you're actually talking to a production assistant outsourced to Southeast Asia who knows nothing about science or medicine, but they just push the tickets through, or they look at the checklist to say, it's 1,500 words, that's too long, reject. Right. So you could be speaking to the person who invented the entire field, or you could essentially be talking to, a relatively unskilled person just pushing through a system.
Yeah. And just a quick word about the systems everyone's working with and the level of decisions people are making. It's really tricky, actually, if you think about the number of actual decisions that go through a paper that a paper has to go through to get published. That's initial reject or push through to peer review decision really does have to be made by someone who understands the paper. That cannot be made cannot really be delegated if a publisher is in any way worth its salt. If you haven't got a fairly senior person who fairly well understands what good looks like at that stage, making lots of quick decisions, and I can go through 60 in a couple of hours, of 60 manuscripts submitted in a couple of hours, and just go, yep, no, yep, no, yep, no. Oh, haven't said yes for a while. Well, yeah, no. Genuinely, that's a first sift on some journals.
So presumably you give different decisions if you've had lunch or not, and all these very subjective human, decision-making heuristics are at play.
Absolutely. And if I'm on a volume, and now, again, that can happen on a high volume, that's a high volume journal with a number of people doing that where I have worked. And I have gone through, like, I need to stop. I am hating all of these, or I'm feeling particularly emotional tonight, and these authors have worked really hard on this, and it's not great, but the topic's lovely, and they've had so many disadvantages getting even to this stage that we must put it through. There is a human there. There is also, and I was going to say, but the other people involved who the system might be sending emails from with various different names on, because the system knows that it's got to work pretty hard to get your attention as a reviewer. They are, the system sends emails as if from the editor-in-chief fairly often. That might be 100% automated. It might be 50% automated, as in the editor gets an email template in front of them, which they can edit a bit if they want. Or it might be 100% automated, in which case the editor doesn't even know they're sending it. And I sometimes get responses to emails that I didn't realize I'd sent, that I realized the system has sent from me, as when I'm in an editor-in-chief role, acting as editor-in-chief, saying to, for example, there's an email that goes to peer reviewers saying, thanks so much for your peer review. It's really valuable. It's really nicely written. I didn't write it. Someone deep in the publishing house wrote it in a nice way ages ago, and it just goes out to all our peer reviewers saying thank you. And people think I wrote it. They go, oh, thanks so much for your lovely email. And I'm like, no, not me. I don't send lovely email.
Hi there, digital health founders. If this conversation is starting to give the unsettling sense that your own evidence base is a little bit thin, then don't panic. That's a normal reaction. Proofstack exists for teams just like yours. Teams that are ambitious, credible, but get slightly terrified once they realise just what buyers actually expect. Visit proofstack.health to put your mind at ease. On with the show. And there's been a lot of agonising, hasn't there, about peer review? So if it's not properly, constructive, could that be, oh, well, people with their vendettas are keeping things down, or, yeah.
So there's all sorts of different there's different ways of doing peer review as well. So there's open peer review, which is everyone knows who everyone is. There's blinded peer review, which is no one knows who anyone is. And there's double blind, which is no one knows who no one is, including the peer reviewers don't know who the authors are, and the authors don't know who the peer reviewers are. Those are subtleties, and different journals do it in different ways, and different editors have different preferences. And it's all kind of bullshit, because it's all to do with trying to make sure we do good quality work. And some people think you make sure you do good quality work by blinding everyone to everything. And that's quite common in medical science because of blinding in randomized controlled trials. And some people think you do good quality work if everyone is transparent about everything. And that doesn't work in a culture where there's a lot of bullying and hierarchy. There isn't a correct, great way to do peer review because human nature is involved. And remember, peer review also happens with scientists on grant committees. The hierarchical nature of science and peer review is because publishing is something that scientists have to do to progress their careers, is very, very complex and laden in terms of getting approval to do stuff and making sure it's fair.
Yeah, but you know what the process you're describing sounds almost judicial. It sounds like I'm making a case, I've got this sort of, aggressive counter argument by why this evidence should be quashed or whatever. It's very strange for, something that started off as look at this neat thing I did with potato to you're a lying liar, why are you lying about everything, and getting quite combative. Is that really improving things, or does that more reflect the structure and the incentives within the system?
Oh, I absolutely, it's bad based on the structure of the incentives in the system. And that's why I say the incentives within the system amongst reviewers and academics are designed by researchers and academics who are running universities and funding organizations, and they just choose to use publishing and peer review as their mechanism to do some judgments, because you got to do some judgments. And what's the fairest way to do it? Well, peer review is this established 100 years of...
But it sounds like a game established by the people who won at that game. And, I think the types of indicators that I hear concern about is in your ideal scenario where the editor-in-chief sends it off to, their two friends and they come back with a good review. In reality now, it's you've got to send it to 50 people and you don't know them. And either none of them come back with a review, some of them come back with worse things, or some of them are being bribed in a peer review circle of someone they met on Twitter, to give them a good review for $200. Like, so that's the degree in which it seems that the system is at risk, particularly in this age of medical misinformation and strange ideas taking root at the highest level in the US, about science going from this very robust, almost Spock-like Vulcan, emotionless, calm, rational logic to actually the reality is it's messy. It's probably always been messy. And now there's money involved. Now there's incentives involved. And now that it's global, it's not just, a researcher in Oxford sending a paper to something in London. We got people all over the place, right? The whole planet.
The opportunity to game the system and get bad research published is absolutely huge. And there is a number of different ways of doing it. There are a number of like properly evil bad actors. There are a number of very naive scientists, and there are a number of really perverse incentives to get things done. There's a lot of talk about getting all peer review paid for, which is really interesting. I am the first person in the world to stand up and say people should be paid for the work they do. And I'm pretty brute about that, but I'm not 100% in favor of publishers or editors paying peer reviewers for reviews. We do it a certain amount where I work, where we need good statistical review, which is well outside my area of expertise. I have deliberately kept my statistical knowledge at exactly the level it needs to be to know that I need a statistical review from an expert statistician. And that works quite well. But you can see how even that becomes really, if you've got one editor working with a pool of 5 or 6 people, and you're more friendly with one than the other, and you've got the authority to bestow money on them, it can get dodgy quickly. But whilst university, and I'm using universities very general term, whilst universities incentivize researchers by the number and the quality of what they publish, and many more universities globally, it's just about number. It's not necessarily about quality. There's sort of a multiplier with the impact factor. And are we even going to go there in this conversation, Paul? I don't know.
Impact factor, yeah. I mean, we can get there in a minute, because the incentives have changed on a global basis in the last 10 years or so in a way that's different, right? Like some of it seems like it's changed from a prestige game to actually people are making life-changing amounts of money for journal acceptance in a household name journal that people have heard of, because in certain countries that are trying to establish themselves as dominant in sciences, they want to encourage their own researchers to do that. But it's potentially, I feel conflicted. On the one hand, we could be accused of being the colonialist first world countries who built all these systems and then won't let anybody in the global south, or whatever you want to call it, in. But conversely, if you're getting 1,000 submissions a day of people reanalyzing the UK Biobank data for the 20,000th time to correlate blood pressure with shoe size using an AI model, then something's got to give, right? The system was designed for a given volume and a given set of traditions. And now if there's thousands of journal researchers all over the world just submitting stuff, because again, there's no marginal cost to it, we're being spammed, essentially. Spam research risks everybody.
You're exactly right. And the unintended consequences of an increase in volume of research is peer reviewers get overwhelmed. So, I've met really good, lovely, honourable scientists who say, I try and peer review twice the number of manuscripts that I submit. But there was checking them on that. No one's giving them money for doing that. They're probably doing it in their spare time because their university is requiring them to do X amount of hours of more teaching than they used to. Because, there's that sort of goodwill part of peer review, which is a part of being a scientist, is getting less and less. And so it gets harder and harder to find good peer reviews. There are a number of businesses peer review is outsourced a lot. Sometimes to machines. It's relatively easy, because how do you choose a peer reviewer if you don't really know the subject? Well, you find someone who knows the subject. How do you find someone who knows the subject and has published similar research on it? You look at the databases and indexes, you find some people, you create a list, you ask them all, because they're getting asked more and more. You have to ask more and more people, and it's this sort of you could imagine the exponential growth of the scientific literature. If it means it's all going to be peer reviewed, pretty soon everyone on Earth is going to be involved in peer review.
Oh, that's a good point, really. So it's kind of like it's got an infection R of 10 or something. And I've certainly experienced this. So for example, if you've got a journal that has 20, 30 Cascade journals, whatever, I'm in the system as someone who returns reviews on time. And therefore, I've given signal to the algorithm Paul will do peer review for you. And so before you know it, now all 30 of them, you'll get an email saying, good news, Paul, you've been added to the Journal of Bingle Bongles because we're about to send you a peer review request. And you're thinking, oh no. And basically the reward for winning the pie eating competition is more pie. And let's be honest, when you say spare time, no one has spare time. That's family time. That's self-care time. That's downtime. So I used to do peer reviews on a Sunday morning. I used to do writing on a Sunday morning. And I wasn't being paid for them. And I think now I look back at that time and kind of think, okay, I need to do that at a certain time. But there must be an apogee for that, right? Where you kind of go, okay, there's a period of time when you want to do this, but the more expert you get, the more asked you get. And you almost need to kind of step off that treadmill, let someone else have a turn. Otherwise, you're just doing all this free labor forever.
A lot of us and a lot of people who get asked to peer review will block emails. Like auto decline is a very common response to our peer review requests. And it's really depressing.
But it's impersonal on both sides, though, isn't it? If I'm getting a bot send me an email request and my bot auto declines, because my fear used to be, if an email lands in my inbox saying you've been invited to do this thing, it's essentially saying here's a surprise 4 hours of work, find 4 hours, and then the next thing that would happen is if you haven't opened it in 3 days, you get another one saying you're late. Or if you say that if you agree to do it and then you haven't done it in 2 weeks, you have this sort of stack of shame piling up in your sort of unread starred thing of like, this was due 2 weeks ago.
There's a really interesting, this is a sort of systems issue, and I think the systems we use are really important. About 4 or 5 years ago, a publisher introduced a "Where is my paper?" finder, which is really useful for authors to go, oh, what stage is it at? Like, where is it has it been rejected? Like, has it been rejected? If it's not been rejected, is it with reviewers? Is it with editors? And it's like a lovely little timeline, really clear. Constructing that fairly simple bit of like nice web stuff was an absolute freaking nightmare. And still there are problems because, for example, in just that sending for peer review thing, the actual points of clicking that someone has to do to make it happen is select peer reviewers, say, I would like this person to be a peer reviewer, invite peer reviewers, peer reviewer to accept the invitation, which is saying, yes, I will peer review, peer review requested, so then the manuscript is sent. So you only get the abstract to decide whether you want to peer review or not. And then you've got peer review return. And a manuscript can go through that cycle 2 or 3 times. And the people constructing this "where is my paper" had to make some decisions. This is insane.
You know what this sounds like? This sounds like it sounds like trying to unsubscribe from a subscription that you didn't want, right? Like they've intentionally made it really hard and horrible because, I could have ordered a burrito on Uber Eats with 2 button clicks, and you're saying just to do a fundamental piece of science, you got to do 10, 12, 15 steps and then have it rigorously evaluated by people. So, well, let me ask you something about that. So, is it rude or considered rude or likely to get you rejected if you email the journal and say, hi, just checking in on the status of this?
Oh, so sometimes it's absolutely necessary. It's never rude to ask what's going on unless the answer is really obvious and someone's all talking, creating work for someone.
Sometimes I've written those messages and people have literally gone, oh, yes, it fell between the cracks. Thank you for reminding us. And you think, well, you've had it for 3 months. But of course, like you say, it's been in a big system. And the other thing that happens, staff changeover.
You've had it for 3 months is people's mindset of empathy with what is happening at the publishers is they think there is an editor with a pile of things on their desk, of literal manuscripts on a desk. I have an interface across, and I work on actually more than one journal. So I have the same interface for more than one journal. I am presented with a page where there are 20 different queues. And so the status of all the manuscripts that I have my fingers on at any point is in a different queue. Of the 20 queues that it's telling me where these manuscripts are, manuscripts may be duplicated. So it's not a sum. I can't sum it up and go, I'm currently handling 250 manuscripts because a manuscript might be both waiting for a second opinion and waiting for a reviewer feedback, right? So it might happen twice. So it's not an easy, I can't make any decisions from that. Nor can I filter what queues I'm looking at to know which ones I am responsible for. Nor can I see, I've got an overdue section, and then the whole lot of queues is replicated with the word overdue and in red. So I can see where things are overdue. So all I can do is start working at the things that I think I can handle that are the most overdue. I do try and work with most overdue things, obviously, but some of them are massively overdue because of someone else or something else, like an amazing piece of research that didn't have standard consent, which some publishers are really hot on, but that has to go up my chain of editorial command to go, and I have to then wait for a monthly meeting for that to be reviewed at the highest levels of the publisher. So can we publish this even though it doesn't do that because it's important in this way, blah, blah, blah. And so that might be massively overdue alongside something else. Everyone's dealing with terrible IT systems unless you're not working, I think.
So as you talk about these systems with huge amounts of text and interaction between people and feelings and emotions, I can't help but wonder, like, what role could AI play in helping you to manage those systems? But also you must already have felt the impact of AI and the content coming into you. So yeah, what kind of role does that play? Are publishers and editors scared or excited about the role of AI, or both?
I I refer you to a meeting of editors in chief I was at a while ago. The question from the front was something along the lines of, how many of you think that authors should be using AI in some way in their submission? And about a third of people said yes, they should, because it's at the stage where why wouldn't you be, like, even something like for spelling and grammar. I'm sure completely different third said, I would immediately reject any manuscript I knew had been anywhere near any AI. To which you think, gosh, well, how would you judge that? I'd just know. There's no one answer. Like, there are huge parts of the publishing process which could very easily be replaced by AI and would improve efficiency of publishing large volumes of full manuscripts that tick loads of boxes. Because there's so many boxes to tick when you submit a manuscript. All of that, easy pickings through AI. But then you have to think as a system, what's that going to result in? More papers. Who's reading the papers? No one. Tell you who's reading papers. AI. So why are they formatted according to all these crazy human rules?
And the problem is yeah, and the challenge is there's so many of those that unless you are very deep into the field, it's hard to know, is that even valuable, right? Because I guess the big change, you mentioned the printing press a few times earlier on, we used to have constraints. There were 12 issues a year. Many journals used to be quarterly. And so there was just, so lots of the traditions we have, like word count, how many figures. I remember when I started publishing, there was very clear guidance on the size of the margins, the line spacing, whether it's double print. And in fact, I'm old enough that when I started publishing, you could actually submit it as a brown envelope to a postal address. And it would say, if you do insist on emailing us, then, it would go to journal@aol.com or something to be promptly ignored. So we've clearly moved on, but no, I think you're right. If the game has changed, and maybe we could talk a little bit about this game that we have. If there is an infinite amount of capacity, and every time a publisher and its journals accept something, they get an article publication fee, which is anything from $1,500, especially for newer journals, right? It's almost like when Uber first came out and it's really cheap, and then you can up the prices, right the way up to some of the top tier prestige journals are charging $12,000, $15,000 for an article. Then essentially you've just created, a graph that's going up and to the right. There's more science going on in the world. There's more researchers. If master's students and PhD students and if it's easier for them to publish because they can use Gemini to help or whatever it is, then this is uncapped, isn't it? But then the readers still only have the same amount of hours in their day to actually read what's going on, unless they too use AI, and then they just are asking AI what they should do next.
I'm not famous for this, but I feel like I don't get enough opportunities to say it. So thank you very much, Paul. There's no such thing as a reader. people who read journals for fun don't exist. People who are actively involved in research, who need to know what is going on in their field and what is built on, what their next research article is built on, and they should be citing, are your readers. And guess what? They are authors as well. And they might be using, and they should be using, like AI and tools to find that stuff. And you get now, I think, and I've heard a fair amount, I've heard from some pretty senior people at pretty big funders going, we're trying to work out how we disentangle ourselves from publication. We do not want to fund people who are focused on publication. We want to fund people who are focused on impact.
That's a whole other episode. But no, I mean, so for example, so in my occasional side role as an angel investor, sometimes someone will come in and they say, we've spun off from university and we've invented this widget. How do we know the widget's good? Oh, because we've got 10 publications. Cool. How much does it cost? Does it work? Will anyone buy it? Oh, we don't know. But look, we've got 10 publications. And you kind of go, I know what's going to happen now. If you get funded by a venture capitalist, you're going to spend that £1 million writing more papers. Whereas, someone who's out there developing a product is going to do market research and user acceptance testing, and they're going to try and sell it for 100 quid, see if anyone buys, then 200 quid, and then look at the Trustpilot reviews, see how many people send it back. And on some ways, that's more evidence than a study. Now, not clear of medical devices, and I'm leaving some other stuff aside for a little bit. But there's a trap, isn't there, that we fall into this. We produce evidence because that's the game that we were trained to do, or that even that science has moved from discovering truth about the universe to getting bits of paper with my name on it. It's all narcissistic budgie girls looking at mirrors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a lot of, that's why I say I'm not attracted to the publishing industry. I'm attracted to science and making science better and improving health. And if I can help make the current system deliver good results, then I will. And that's kind of what I think I do. Do I think the current system is serving us as well as it could or as efficiently as it could? Absolutely not.
So if I stumble across a lamp at an antique show on the weekend and I rub it and a genie comes out and I give them my wish, I wish to make the secret editor, the editor-in-chief in chief. They are in charge of all the chiefs for as long as you like. What changes would you want to implement to make the system better?
I like that. No, the genie bit, love it. The in charge of all the other editors in chief, pointless. I would move to academia and sort the fuck out of academia, because I think that is the broken culture, the hierarchical culture, the way in which the hierarchies and merit is so deeply embedded in how we have done things historically, that is not fit for purpose for the future. That's the bit I would fix.
So not the gatekeepers, but sort of the means of production. So you got academia on one side. What about the publishers? And people from outside our industry. You read in the Guardian, people go, "Oh my gosh, did you know researchers work for free and then they peer review for free, and then these publishers make a 40% profit margin? What's going on?" And I think if you explain it to someone outside our industry, it sounds insane. It sounds like free money, and that's why it's interesting. You mentioned Robert Maxwell. It sounds like this infinite perpetual money machine that he discovered. Do we need to do something about that?
I mean, I don't think it should exist. There are a number of publishers that aren't just publishers and do other things, but the publishing bit is so profitable that's where the investment goes, and that's what grows, and that's what they want more, I suppose, and they grow more. Big for-profit listed companies that are publishers, guess what? They're doing what works for their shareholders in terms of profit. Guess what? They're not interested in the societal effects it has beyond the societal effects of running a good public company that's making good returns for shareholders. I'm afraid I am slightly prone to impractical, blow it all up and start again solutions, but actually you have to follow the thread of what is incentivizing what, and you have to look outside your immediate decision making thread to go, well, why, but why, but why, but why, and then you get, oh, that's why we're getting so many manuscripts like this, or that's why these people think that they're entitled to that, or that's why. And at the end of the day, so much of it comes down to actual profit, and we are but pawns in the system that we work in, both on a publishing level, but even bigger and bigger and bigger as well.
Well, I'm going to say thank you to our secret editor. You've given us a rare look behind the curtain of medical publishing. So not just the glossy version, but the real one where the incentives, time pressure, and judgment calls really collide. So thank you for being willing to speak candidly. And for everyone listening, if this episode made you feel a bit uncomfortable, that's probably a good sign. Evidence isn't just about data, it's about preparation, judgment, respect for the system you're entering, as flawed as it may be. That's it for this episode of Prove It. If you're building something bold and wondering whether your evidence would survive contact with reality or the publishing machine that we've just described, please share this episode with your team. I'm Paul Wicks. Thank you for joining us.